mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Jersey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of APA and Chair of the Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today, Friday, June 16th? 15th? Maybe it's the 15th. We're going to be hearing the presentation, A Roadmap for Age-Friendly Communities. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number shown. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those again in that questions box on the right of your screen, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And I'll just ask, if you're asking a question for a particular panelist, please list who you would like to answer that question. On your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2017. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. If you're looking down the list and you don't see your chapter or your division listed, we just ask that you reach out to them and tell them to join us. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Private Practice Division, and you can learn more, oh I'm sorry, I have the wrong link down there. You can learn more about all of our divisions and our chapters by visiting planning.org/chapters or planning.org/divisions. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. You can register for these by visiting our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and we do have some more coming up in July and August, so definitely keep an eye out. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head over to planning.org and log into your My APA account. And then you can search for CM activities by either entering in today's webcast title or the webcast event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and you can check those out on our webcast webpage. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. And we are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And we will have a PDF of the PowerPoint available at the end of the presentation on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Okay, at this time I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ramona with the Private Practice Division to kick us off.
Good morning, everyone from Hawaii. I am very happy to present this session from the Private Practice Division. As you know, America is aging. I think since 2011, when the first baby boomers turned 65, a lot of people have paid more attention to the aging population. We are told that over the next 16 or 17 years, 10,000 baby boomers will reach the age of 65. This aging cohort of Americans, which represent 26% of the U.S. population, will dramatically change the composition of the country. The baby boomer generation will create a redefined old age in America, as we all know. This older population in general, like the population itself, is also becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. Racial and ethnic minorities comprised 21% of the population back in 2013, will comprise almost 28%, 29% by 2030. Many parts of the country, especially counties in the rural Midwest, are aging in place because a disproportionate share of young people have moved elsewhere. America's over age 65 tends to be concentrated in specific geographical areas like Florida and the Southwest, but also in places where there's a large outmigration of its younger residents. An aging population is really a challenge for a community that is not prepared for this change. In fact, the aging population presents both a challenge and an opportunity to transform and improve our communities. It will bring profound challenges to healthcare, social services, housing, transportation, workforce, retirement safety net, and every aspect of life, this we know. At the same time, we can't forget that it's also an extraordinary opportunity to create healthy environments that encourage active lifestyles for all the residents. And remember, older adults are really vital assets to our communities. Planners play a key role in creating an age-friendly community as we are involved in the development of the structures and services that either support or hinder the well-being, independence, productivity, and the prosperity of people of all ages. However, the aging population demands a fundamental shift in planning and the way we think about planning. APA's Aging and Community Policy Guide really represents 6 policies for planners. They cover engagement, housing and quality transportation options, land use, zoning tools, economic well-being, and community assets and supports. All of these policies can help planners frame solutions that really help us foster the conversations, the coalitions, and the shared strategies that we need to link generations successfully and to really build these communities that are livable for all. In this session today, we'll explore new opportunities, innovative planning strategies, partnerships and delivery models to foster aging in community in 3 specific guiding policy areas of transportation, housing, community supports, and connections. We can use this aging policy guide as a tool to re-envision our population aging to deliver thriving places for all ages, with the ultimate goal of maintaining the connections and activities of young and old. Let me introduce today's speakers. Dr. Mildred Warner is professor of the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cornell University, and her work focuses primarily on government service delivery, economic development, and planning across generations. Her research has explored the impact of privatization and devolution on local government, the role of human services as part of the social infrastructure. Jana Lynott, who's the Senior Strategic Policy Advisor on Livable Communities for AARP's Public Policy Institute, manages AARP's Transportation Research Agenda, and she is solely responsible for the Livable Communities chapter of the AARP policy book, which was adopted by AARP Policy Council and Board. Her research and now videography focuses on a broad array of planning and policy issues on human services, transportation coordination, TOD, street design, for active living. One of the great things that she has done recently, and she does great things obviously, is the Livability Index that is excellent for any community to access, to be able to use that as a starting point to seeing how livable their community is. And finally, last but not least, Ellen De La Torre is a self-described urban gerontologist who is passionate about translating research into policy and practice. He's a research associate at the Portland State University's Institute on Aging, and he coordinates the age-friendly Portland County initiatives. Let me start it by turning over to Mildred. Mildred?
Hey Mildred, are you there?
There, I was having trouble unmuting the mute button, and so sorry. Yes, I'm here now. Thank you very much. Sorry for that little delay. I'm really pleased to be able to present today, particularly because Ramona is letting me go first on the issue of community connections. And so much of the time when we focus on age-friendly, we tend to focus on issues of housing, land use, and transportation. And I particularly today am pleased that we're giving extra attention to the issue of community connections, because I think it may actually be one of the most important things that we do. What I want to show you is I want to make an argument that we need a broader approach, that we shouldn't be focusing just on aging. We should focus on all ages, children, caregivers, and seniors, that we shouldn't focus just on physical, but we should also focus on the social layer, this issue of community connections, that we shouldn't focus just on design. It's very important, but for many of those Midwestern communities that are losing population, they don't get the opportunity to redesign their communities. They need to figure out how to make the communities they have work better. And if we think about issues of maintenance and use, that gives us an option of more ways to move than just in the physical design arena. And we shouldn't focus just on the typical things that planners do, zoning, building codes, physical design, but also on the institutional partnerships that we might wish to make if we want to make a difference in this work. And I'm going to be drawing on evidence from national surveys that we've done with APA and AARP and ICMA over the last decade. And I'm also going to take y'all to Rome, Italy, because it's summer and it would be nice to go on vacation, but I had the opportunity to be there these last 6 months working with a team of undergraduate students from Cornell who were in neighborhoods, peripheral neighborhoods to Rome, and they were looking at these neighborhoods through the eyes of child and age-friendly, and I thought I'd share with you a little bit of what they saw. It might stimulate our own thinking for our work here in the U.S. So where do we start? I want to make the argument that we can look across all ages, because if you look at UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities Initiative and WHO's Age Friendly Cities Initiative, you'll see that there are many common elements. And the elements I've highlighted in blue tend to be focused more on the physical, and the elements I've highlighted in green tend to be more focused on the social. And it's that social layer that I want to give particular attention to today. The physical layer, we typically might think of it in terms of a functionality curve, and this is something that WHO has used that looks at the capacity as you age, as you grow up, you get more able to engage your environment more independently, and then in later life you may become less able and more, and this is where inclusive design can make a huge difference in enhancing your ability and your capacity to engage the world. But where physical design stops is where service provision picks up. And this could be formal service provision in the market or through government, or it could be informal service provision provided by family, friends, and neighbors. And so we think about all of these pieces, the design and the service provision and the informal connections, together helping all of us have full capacity in an enabling environment throughout all of the life cycle. So thinking about design, one of the things that hit us, boy, within the first week or two of being in Rome is that they have really well-designed streets with really well-designed crosswalks and intersections, including islands to stand on in the middle if you can't get all the way across in one fell swoop. But we see that this is regularly undermined by violating uses. It's pretty common. Cars are very privileged in Rome, and people like to park them wherever they can. Sidewalks become great parking places, and crosswalks, particularly where you have the ramp to get up from the street to the sidewalk, is commonly populated by a car. So when we think about planning, we don't want to just think about the traditional tools of planning in terms of building and zoning codes and good design. We also need to pay attention to the role of participation, norms, services, and institutions in help making that good design actually work in a more social environment where we actually live. And so that's why I'm happy to be able to talk about community connections today. So where's current practice? As I mentioned, I'll be talking about surveys that we have from several national surveys that we've done over the last decade, in addition to these Rome neighborhood case studies from this past spring. And common themes that come out in all of this work is that planning, particularly the nitty-gritty of building codes and zoning, really matters. but participation also matters greatly. And so let's talk about that. Let me give you quickly some results from the Planning Across Generations survey, which we conducted with almost 1,500 cities responding across the U.S. back in 2013. We did this work with the International City County Management Association. And what you'll see is that the built environment isn't optimal, and it's less optimal in suburbs and rural areas than it is in urban areas. Half of your rural areas don't have a neighborhood school. So when we think about a neighborhood school as possibly being a focal point for intergenerational activity, if you don't have one, then that becomes more of a problem. Particularly, again, for rural areas, sidewalk systems connecting, playgrounds nearby, even access to food markets, these things are much, much lower in rural areas. And that's a lot of that Southern Florida piece, and that's also a lot of that Midwestern piece that Ramona pointed out in her early slides. So we have a lot of work to do. Zoning regulations can help us build the better future that we're looking for. And again, here you see that cities lead the way in thinking about and having zoning regulations that help new development build in the direction that we know we need to go. Sidewalk systems, parks nearby, street connections between adjacent developments. I want to point out here that the suburbs, 60% of the suburbs now no, it's a little more like 55% of suburbs are now paying attention to street connections. Typically, suburbs tended to want to be isolated, and now we're recognizing that we need to connect them. In terms of allowing the kinds of businesses that you need inside a neighborhood to serve the needs of the residents of that neighborhood, like child care, like elder care, like some mixed use so that you can have some retail or food nearby. You see we've still got quite a long way to go. And accessory units, allowing accessory dwelling units is still found in less than 20% of places, and Alan's going to talk a lot about that when we get to his presentation at the end. Typically, we have separated services for children from services for elders. And this, I think, is probably the wave of the past, and the wave of the future probably will focus on more integrated services. But the good news on this chart that I want you to notice is that rural, suburban, and urban places all tend to provide services at about the same level. So while we saw big differences in this urban-suburb-rural gradient when it came to the built environment and when it came to zoning and building codes, we see much more similarity in services. And this is good because services are making up for the inadequacy in the physical environment. We're seeing some integration of services to promote mobility. 10% of communities around the country use their school buses to transport seniors. Now, you know, 85% of communities in the U.S. don't have public transit systems. They may have a Medicaid transit system, but they don't have a public transit system. And so school buses could be an option because every community has a school bus system, but most of us don't allow people who aren't aged 4 to 18 ride on them. But we can think about that as a new way to move. We can also think about, we are seeing a lot more work thinking about the need for restrooms, enhanced crosswalks, street furniture, demand responsive transit. This is where we are seeing more action. One of the ways to address the community connections piece is to have the agencies in your communities work together. And we asked on this survey, in your community, do any of the following agencies work in cross-agency partnerships to serve children or elders? And right at the top of the list, we found libraries, parks and recreation departments, and school districts. And indeed, when my students were working in Rome, they also found that these were the agencies at the neighborhood level that were really paying attention to these planning across generation concerns. On a more negative note, I want to draw your eyes down to the bottom of this chart where you see the little red arrows that show that planning departments are much less likely to be involved in such cross-agency partnerships, and the transportation or highway department is the least likely. This is where we need a lot more work because mobility is one of our big concerns, and we need to get our colleagues in transportation on board, and Jana will be telling us how. What leads to change? We've done regression models on each of these surveys And we have found that what really drives the difference in communities that have better built environment and broader housing options is that they have better zoning and building codes. Makes sense, but it's nice to see it supported in the data. And then what leads them to have better zoning codes is a comprehensive plan that actually has paragraphs in it that speak to their interest in addressing the needs of elders or children. And what drives them to have good comprehensive planning is the engagement and participation of elders and children. So participation is really the foundation for everything else to move forward, which leads us to the question of how do we get to participation. And now I want to turn our attention to Rome and the 4 neighborhoods where my students were working this spring. And the Historic Center is in the part right around the Tiber River here. So these are peripheral neighborhoods outside the old Roman walls. And Piazza Alessandria is a rich neighborhood that's experiencing some regeneration after having lost a lot of its offices. San Giovanni is a neighborhood that's it's a transit node, and there's actually a road that you use to get quickly through Rome that runs through this neighborhood, so it has lots of transients going through it each day. Tufelo is a public housing neighborhood. If any of you ever saw the movie Bicycle Thief, it was filmed right nearby. And Pineta Sacchetti is a self-built peripheral neighborhood that didn't benefit from any planning at all. So one of the things that came up in this student work was that while there's so much attention given to the built environment, it's really the social and institutional layer that seems to make the biggest difference. And they walked into these neighborhoods, and at first their eyes were really focused on the physical layer. But as they looked down, they began to notice how much local institutions matter. Libraries and schools were the first to reach out and grab these students, these foreign students wandering around their neighborhoods, and say, hey, can you come work with us? Here's an example of the library in Tufelo, where our students are working with high schoolers on thinking about how they would begin to assess child and age friendliness of this neighborhood. The students did mapping exercises. They did photo voice with children in a local school, and they helped to develop a sense of what residents' visions were for multi-generational planning. Participation actually was relatively easy to get. The elder centers were quite anxious to engage and enjoyed the opportunity to share ideas with the students, and school classrooms, teachers found the photo voice exercise a fun thing for their kids to do. And it helped to build a sense of thinking about your neighborhood for all ages and creating some sense of reciprocity and connection, which is what we really need to do, because our younger generation is much more ethnically diverse than our seniors, and we need to build opportunities for sharing across those differences. Informal institutions and norms really matter. I showed you the car parked in the crosswalk at the beginning of this presentation, and now I want to show you the courtyard space in one of the social housing complexes in Tufelo, where the sidewalk is all torn up and people are parking their motorbikes, which are ubiquitous in Rome, in front of the door. And you hear a quote here from a resident saying, you know, we feel unsafe to go out. Walk down the street a block, find a exactly similar design of apartment block with courtyard in the front, and see a very different result. See the bikes and the motorbikes parked away so that you can still get up and down the sidewalk, and notice that the neighbors have built a little playground in the middle of the courtyard, and they're saying, you know, look, we feel safe leaving our children because we can watch them from the windows. What made the difference in these two neighborhoods? Informal institutions, the norms, the relationships among neighbors. So I'd also said earlier that good design can be obliterated by poor maintenance and inappropriate use. Here's Piazza Alessandria, our older, richer neighborhood, which has beautifully well-designed intersections. That's the green in the map. But the maintenance on them is not very good. That's the yellow. And the violation of the intended use, which is the red, is ubiquitous. So you see how you can quickly obliterate good design with poor maintenance and inappropriate use. Flip that on its head Let's go out to Pineta Sacchetti, the unplanned neighborhood on the edge of the city, and you'll notice that the green indicates where there are sidewalks, and many of the streets are red, meaning they have no sidewalks at all. And you're looking at one of them that has dumpsters and people walking down the middle, and then you're looking at another one on the left where people are walking down the middle, but it seems to be cleaner even though it's covered with car parking everywhere. And what happens in this neighborhood is that norms of use that slow the flow of traffic through creates a complete street kind of experience, even though none of the design elements in the physical sense meet the requirements of complete streets. So what the participation enabled our students to see were invisible assets. They're not the physical ones, they're the social ones. And one of the most important ones was maybe this notion of slow flow, because when you have competing uses in a street, you can, if you slow down the speed, then maybe you can deal with that competition in a way that still creates a safe place for children and elders to walk, bike, or play. Part of what led to this in this neighborhood of Pineta Sacchetti was deeply rooted institutions in their schools, in their community centers, in their library that helped to reinforce neighborhood norms and encourage intergenerational respect. And this gave a sense of local control and a robust sense of place, which would also give a sense of belonging. Let me move now to San Giovanni, which was the neighborhood by a transit node. You see the transit node up at the top end of the neighborhood, and here's a picture of it, and it has lots and lots of bus lines, a tram line, and now a metro line running through it. And while we think of transit-oriented development as potentially being very good for children and elders, it can also negatively impact them. And the students here did a livability audit, and they noticed several things that you can see on this map. First, the green is the only green space in the neighborhood. And there used to be more green space also along the yellow metro line, but with the metro line in construction, that green space was lost to the community. The blue line in the middle is a very busy street, and so the people on the upper side of the neighborhood have more trouble accessing green space than those on the lower side of the neighborhood. You can also, the students did an extensive service inventory and discovered that food stores, which are the red dots, are much less common in the upper part of the neighborhood closer to the transit node and much more common in the lower part of the neighborhood. And you may recall that Italians have the tradition of going shopping every day because they like their food very fresh. And so having a greater distance to travel to get to food stores can be a problem. Also, people complained of congestion and pollution. Almost everyone we interviewed complained of smog, and that they didn't actually like being out, going out for a walk or going to a park because of so much congestion and traffic. Bus traffic was creating all this smog. So, can we rebuild cities for all ages? The answer is yes. A regeneration project like Piazza Alessandra is thinking about its regeneration. It can be multi-generational, but we need to pay attention to the needs of children and elders if that's where we want to go. And to do that, we need an all-inclusive planning approach. Design matters, absolutely. Services matter, absolutely. But building some kind of connection between children, elders, and those of us in the middle to create a common vision is what we need. If you're interested, the students developed one-page issue briefs, which are available on my website, looking at this question of walkability, moving beyond just design, the challenges of living next to a transit corridor, the mechanisms and techniques you might use to better hear the voices of children and elders, and then this particular interest in the role of local institutions. And I encourage you to go to the website and download these issue briefs. They're written telling an Italian story, but with the idea of sharing that in a U.S. environment. There's also other articles on my website that are referencing the national surveys that we have done, where we can definitively say that participation is the foundation And that's what leads to change, and then the planning and zoning codes are where things really matter. And with that, I am done, and we'll turn the slides over to Jana.
Great. Can folks hear me okay? Maybe I'm not able to hear you is the problem. Anyway, hello, this is Jana Leinert with AARP's Public Policy Institute. And I'm looking for the key to accept to show my screen.
Jana, can you try clicking on the little GoToWebinar button at the bottom of your screen?
Well, I see that. I see the GoToWebinar page, but I haven't seen it come through.
Okay. Mildred, can you try one more time sending it over? You might need to minimize your presentation. It might be behind your presentation.
I'm on the control panel, and it's not showing me the options anymore to move the screen.
Can you close down from presentation mode?
I did. I've got no options showing here.
Is there a left red arrow and a panel on the side of your screen that you can open up?
Nope.
And can you take PowerPoint and just minimize it completely?
I'm not even on it.
Can you get to the screen that, Sorry folks, I'm not sure what's going on.
I'm not either. Because I sent it to you, Jana, and now I'm stuck in a part that's not showing anything else.
Right, Mildred, you should be fine, but Jana, you don't see the little box?
For some reason, I don't.
And Jana,
let me try sending it. Let me send it back to you, and then you send it back to me, because I can send it back to you for some reason. Okay, show my screen.
Perfect.
Oh, great.
Okay.
All right, sorry again for that little technological glitch. Again, I'm Jana Leinert with AARP, and the focus of my presentation today is really talking about the new transportation technology that's coming online in the United States and really across the world that spells an era of disruption, both positive and potentially negative for our nation. So what I want to talk about is to present a vision for a future transportation system that can better serve America's needs. Also talk a bit about new service opportunities that are showing up in both urban and rural areas, and present some of my concerns for the potential pitfalls of the changing landscape and what planners should be thinking about as we move forward in this new environment. Now, in survey after survey that AARP has done and through other sources such as the National Elder Care Locator, we know that transportation rises to the top of the list of needs among older adults and their families and communities around the country. The senior transportation community has been working on this issue for at least the past 25 years, talking about the challenges, looking for solutions, advocating for more dollars and services, and unfortunately we really haven't gotten very far. I'm hearing Ramona's voice, and is everything going okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're fine, Ramona. I just need you to keep muted.
Okay. So with all the work that we've done in the past 25 years, we've never met the demand, not to mention even kept up with the rising demand as our nation ages. But this is a point in my career where I can say that it's really, we're at a time when we can significantly change our transportation reality, not only in our cities, but also in our rural communities as well. that technological innovation is here and on the fast track for development. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there, but we really need to understand the opportunity and coax it and manage it, or our communities may suffer some unintended consequences and we're not going to achieve what we could achieve with where we're going and the environment that we're working in. Now, to understand the opportunity that exists before us, we really need to understand some of the failures of our current transportation system. This is a system that works well for many people, but it also isolates many people. And there's no dearth of stories about able young men and women who are subjected to the indignity of joblessness because they have no way to get to a job, or stories of older adults who feel their lives are over when they have to hang up their keys, simply because there are no transportation options available to them. Now, mobility is a challenge in communities across the United States, small and large. And I believe that the current failure of our transportation system is largely due to the fact that our society has embraced a personalized transportation system where one must own his or her own mobility, meaning they must own a personal private vehicle to really maximize their mobility in America. Instead, I think as this technology develops, we need to be thinking about how do we create a community transportation system where any one of us can access it to meet our particular needs. So just a few basic premises that I'm working with in my own mind as I think about these opportunities is that the public and private resources need to come together to offer everyone, young and old, an affordable transportation system, an alternative to owning private vehicles. It needs to be customer focused. We need to integrate our transportation across modes. There needs to be modal silo busting, and we need to build upon our existing public transportation investment, both the investment that we've made in our cities as well as in our more rural areas. Now, areas where this innovation is happening, and which I'll talk a little bit about, are in trip planning apps, integrated ride scheduling and dispatching for demand response public transportation, first mile and last mile service to public transportation, medical transportation, volunteer transportation, what's known as ride sourcing or transportation network companies, think about Uber and Lyft, and autonomous vehicles. And these are not necessarily mutually exclusive areas or modes, but there's innovations in each of these areas. Now, to really fulfill the promise that this new technology brings, I think we have to envision our transportation system as mobility as a service. This is a new term in transportation circles, and that really is what I've just described, where you're moving from having to own your transportation to basically picking your transportation from a smorgasbord of options and being able to tap in. Now, my own iPhone is kind of an example of how some of how the new trip planning apps can help my own mobility as I try to get around the Washington, D.C. area and other cities around the country. So for instance, one of the greatest barriers to mobility is knowing what services exist in one's community or the community one is visiting. So the way I use the new technology, and I want to point out that I'm not endorsing any of these apps or any of the companies that I've listed here. They're here for demonstration purposes, examples solely. There's a lot out there that I am not talking about. But anyway, what I tend to use personally is if I'm trying to get driving directions, I either use Google Transit or Waze, and both of those apps give me real-time information based on traffic conditions in the area that I'm at. I also use both the DC Metro and the Move It bus and rail applications to see transit information and when the next bus is coming. When I'm feeling a bit more adventurous, I could try spontaneous carpooling with Waze Carpool or our Council of Governments' new carpooling app, Carpool Now. And when I'm willing to spend a little more money, I might order a ride through Lyft, Lyft Line, Uber, or Uber Pool. Now, one thing that the transit apps all have in common is that they are pulling information from what's called the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS. There's GTFS static and GTFS real-time. And basically, this is a portal that allows transit providers to upload their route and schedule information into this system so that anyone trying to build an app is able to access that data. So that's why you see a proliferation of various types of apps which are not dependent on really getting the go-ahead through a transit agency or funding. Once you upload that data, it just becomes widely available. But currently, that system only works for fixed route public transportation. But as I'll talk in a moment, that's potentially changing. Now, just as an example, this is a screenshot from the Move It app, and it is giving me an option for a particular trip that I could go by bus, which would take 30 minutes, or I have 2 Metro Rail options, slightly faster, or if I want to cut my travel time down but spend more money, it's giving me an option to order an Uber real time. So this is to demonstrate that as we move toward mobility as a service, we're able to see all of the trip options available to us, as well as eventually be able to, for those type of rides that have to be scheduled in advance and paid for, to be able to do that within the app itself. Now, what if your transit system hasn't uploaded its data to the GTFS? And this is an example of a trip that I have taken by Greyhound bus between Ames and Marshalltown, Iowa. So I know that that bus exists. But if there's a bus and no one knows about it, is there really a bus? And I would argue that there's not. And I would say that we should be talking with our transit providers to make sure that our local systems have uploaded their data so that people anywhere can access that information, and really helps to expand mobility options within our country. I have learned through my network that Greyhound has made a decision to eventually upload its data, so that could be changing in the near future. Now you can juxtapose that with Jefferson Lines, which has uploaded its data for a number of years, and when I type in Kansas City to Minneapolis, I'm able to see a number of different bus times to get me there. Eventually, Jefferson's vision is to be able to schedule and pay for those trips online within an application like Google Transit. Now, what if your local bus doesn't run on a fixed route schedule, but you want to be part of this national system where someone with a smartphone could learn about your service? That's the case with the majority of rural public transportation operators. Their demand response, they require some scheduling in advance. Now, Google, with a number of other online tech community folks of transit-interested coders, have drafted what's called a GTFS Flex Spec, and Vermont, the Vermont Agency for Transportation, is one of the first states that is trying out this new spec and uploading data from its demand response system into the overall system, so that in the very near future, you will be able to type in, and if someone has scheduled one of their demand response buses, you'll be able to see that immediately and figure out what time it's going to be passing your particular location along the route. So it's really expanding that service for many, many people, and it's a model, I'm hoping it will be very much a model for the rest of the country. Now, another area of technology development and an area that has really challenged demand response transportation providers, particularly those providing specialized and human services transportation on a non-fixed route schedule, is how do you integrate ride scheduling and dispatching when you have multiple providers for different agencies and nonprofits in a community with a different set of clients, but there's that desire to run transportation service more efficiently and not have a redundancy of 2 different organizations sending out 2 different vans to the same location at about the same time. Coordination for a variety of reasons is very challenging, but it's made additionally challenging by the set of proprietary software packages that this type of scheduling and dispatching runs on, and they don't communicate well with one another. There's a project ongoing this year by the Transit Cooperative Research Program that is working to develop the technical specifications that will allow these providers to share that portion of data that is needed to be shared to coordinate transportation services, but to protect the other portion of data that needs to be kept proprietary, either because customers' privacy needs to be protected or industry kind of software proprietary coding needs to be protected. So that is estimated to come out, be completed in May of next year. And my hope is that it will be successful and that we can use that in our contracts with the software companies, with demand response contract providers, and just within our own, government agency service to make sure that they are using that specification to share data to improve coordination. Now I'd like to talk a bit about ride sourcing, ride splitting, ride sharing. These are the types of services offered by what's called transportation network companies, or the best known are Uber and Lyft, but there are others out there. I suppose many of you have heard of transit or local partnerships with Uber and Lyft for first mile, last mile service to public transportation, and these types of partnerships are becoming more and more common. Uber drivers, for instance, are getting folks in Summit, New Jersey to the train station. Lyft provides residents of Centennial, Colorado with lifts to light rail. But that's just one class of public-private partnership arrangement with ride sourcing companies. And I call them ride source as opposed to their preferred name of ride share. I think in the technical terminology, ride sharing is services like Lyft Line or Uber Pool, where people unknown to one another are actually carpooling and sharing rides. Ride sourcing is your traditional Uber service. Ride splitting is where you can split the cost among, say, a colleague or with a friend for a particular trip that you've ordered. So, for instance, Uber or Lyft are now doing what would be considered more specialized or human services transportation as well. Lyft, for instance, just signed a contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield to provide transportation to qualifying clients of the insurance company. But they're not the only ones providing this type of human services transportation. Silver Ride was formed in 2007 specifically to serve anyone with mobility limitations, with a target market in the San Francisco Bay Area of older adults. And they provide door-through-door service, meaning that they not only, their drivers will help the individual get out of their car, they'll help them walk up steps, they will get them through the door, maybe help put away their groceries. They're really a much higher level of service than a traditional TNC company would provide. They also, because of their demographic target market, they train their drivers in person on how to safely help people in and out of the vehicle, in and out of the wheelchair, as well as some basic training on how to identify signs of cognitive impairment and other types of medical issues that may be common among their clientele. Now, while they use a similar app to other TNCs, they also offer a call center where an older adult or caregiver can talk directly with a ride scheduler. And they also have contracts with independent and assisted living services or centers where they have, in some cases, replaced the private transportation offered by that independent living center with that would be very limited in its supply, with 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service to any destination in the Bay Area. Now, another company that has come online in the last year is called Liberty, or Liberty Mobility Now, and its intentional target market is rural America. And senior transportation was one of the primary motivators for Valerie Loeffler, who founded the company, but it serves everyone in the community. It also looks for unique partnerships with a variety of agencies focused on health and human services, economic development, travel and tourism to improve mobility options in rural America. So it receives revenue through its traditional TNC type of service with contract drivers and clientele, but it also has a software platform that it will share for a fee with hospitals, care facilities, employers, nonprofits, basically an online computer portal that helps match the scheduling of, say, medical appointments with ride scheduling through their network. And they also can tie in other transportation providers in the community through what would be a coordinated transportation system so that they could actually schedule rides not only on one of their contract drivers, but on one of the specialized transportation vehicles and services in the community.
Jana, I'm just interrupting to give you a 5-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. Now, another example of where ride-sharing companies are used to provide specialized transportation service is the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, which is conducting a 1-year on-demand paratransit pilot program with Uber and Lyft, who will provide rides to 88 paratransit companies, paratransit customers, I'm sorry. Both of those companies have been working in the Boston area to identify drivers with access to accessible vehicles. They've also reached out to, say, taxi cab companies to tap into the fleet of those accessible vehicles, so a customer in the Boston area is able to specifically request an accessible vehicle through the app. Having a fleet of accessible vehicles is a big problem. It was a problem before TNCs came on the market. It continues to be a problem today. Massachusetts is probably the one state that has gone the furthest to push through state policy to try to increase the supply of accessible vehicles that are available to people who are basically purchasing transportation. And there's a new law that requires that TNCs provide wheelchair accessible vehicles. So we'll be watching the implementation of that law very closely to see if there are some lessons learned for how that is going to be made possible. And then a final example that I'd like to offer is ITN America, which is a volunteer driver program, a nonprofit dedicated to providing volunteer transportation with a target market of seniors. They've been in business for at least 20 years, but they are just unveiling a new service called ITN Country that changes their model so that it is less expensive for agencies, communities to bring volunteer transportation service to their communities, and they'll also be using an app similar to that used by other transportation network companies. Now, I want to move on and talk about autonomous vehicles. This is really the big, sexy, new technology that is coming online that gets a lot of attention, and I think there's a tremendous amount of potential here to expand mobility options to folks in the United States. But again, there are some cautions that we all need to be aware of. But in terms of the kind of the rollout of the technology, from what I have seen, it looks like companies are estimating that they are going to start bringing autonomous vehicles to the commercial market beginning in the year 2020. Now, that may not be widespread. It may be very limited markets, but again, we are at a point as city planners where we really have to start thinking about what this means for our communities and plan accordingly. There are a number of policy considerations surrounding the introduction of autonomous vehicles, such as how are vehicles to be insured, who will be liable in the event of a crash, cybersecurity, my term, death algorithms, basically in the fraction of a second that these cars have to decide the extent to which they can not avoid a collision, who gets prioritized. So for instance, are they going to protect the passengers inside the vehicle, or are they going to protect the more vulnerable pedestrian on the road? Now, all of these questions are huge and very important, but what I want to focus on is more those specific questions that planners have the opportunity to influence as the rollout of this technology happens. So let me talk a bit about the positive opportunities from autonomous vehicles. I think the number one opportunity here is for significant reduction in road fatalities. 35,000 people lost their lives on our roadways in 2015. I believe that number grew to 40,000 lives in 2016, and that's after a decade of decline. 94% of all our road fatalities are due to human error. So again, if these cars can drive smarter and better than those of us currently driving on the roads, that's probably not a bad thing. Another opportunity could significantly increase mobility for those who do not drive, including the 1 in 5 adults over the age of 65 in this country. This technology could also free up land use dedicated to moving or parking our personal vehicles for better uses. Lower parking requirements could reduce the cost of housing. And one expert estimates that in many cities, up to 45% of the traffic is caused by people looking for a place to park. Programming autonomous vehicles to drive more efficiently would yield smaller gaps between cars, more cars per lane, smoother braking, thus easing congestion and energy use. And AV deployment could cut average vehicle ownership rates. Some research indicates that the number of cars per household could drop by 43%, from an average of 2.1 vehicles to 1.2 vehicles per household. Another study said that if a shared fleet of AVs, this would be not personal ownership, but using this service through a company like Uber, would, in combination with public transportation, could sustain current mobility levels using only 10% of the cars we currently have on the road today. Now, with the latter points here, the big assumption is that we're going to move to mobility as a service, move away from private ownership of our vehicles to purchasing transportation in the minute, in the day, in the year, etc. But what if that doesn't happen? What if our society does not embrace a new vision for shared use mobility? What if people decide they don't mind a longer commute if they can work while their car drives them to their destination? What if people decide it's cheaper to let their autonomous vehicle roam around town instead of paying to park it while they shop, attend a meeting, a performance, etc.? What if a majority find it more convenient to use an autonomous vehicle, either privately owned or even in a ride-share arrangement, as opposed to using the public transportation that they would have previously used? Will public transportation be there for those of more limited means at the same frequency and quality as it is today? And I would say, after several years dedicating my career in public transportation, that as a nation, as a society, we tend to invest in transit not for the most vulnerable among us, but when it is used by everyone, including well-off people who can afford high-speed rail service into a downtown area. So there's been some studies. So some of the best that I've seen are through the ENO Foundation's, their Center for Transportation, and they have documented that if this is from the University of Michigan, which was cited in their study, that if Americans each buy a vehicle with an inexpensive AV technology, research models estimate a 75% increase in individual vehicle usage. Now, transportation planners, that frightens me quite a lot. Another question: even if autonomous vehicles are able to pick up the presence of pedestrians and bicycles, will these non-motorized users feel comfortable in a new transportation environment that does not have traffic lights? There's a lot of unknowns with the rollout of this technology. So what do we as planners need to do and be thinking about? First off, I'd like to recommend that we structure our new transportation and land use policy around a commitment to shared use mobility. And we need a strong commitment around this vision where our public transportation system is the backbone of transportation, and that these various modes, whether it be a kind of a shared network of autonomous vehicles, whether it be existing TNC service, whether it be bike share, etc., that it is, you know, working as a complement to public transportation. Also, we need to manage our curbside parking. This is something I've encountered already with new TNC service in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I commute by bike to my job downtown, and I have to say that the bike lanes that are not separated from motor vehicles no longer work. Every block, 3 or 4 Uber drivers are pulling into the bike lane, letting passengers off. So we have to figure out, how do you clearly demarcate road space for all users and protect that space? I think of the slides that Mildred showed about Italians parking in the crosswalk. Again, it's going to be a lot about maintaining the proper balance between the different modes and making sure that we have a good plan and system in place to do that. Also, with managing curbside parking, we need more of it for that quick drop-off pickup, and we also need to make sure it's accessibly designed so that older people who are going to need more time to get in and out of the vehicles, who are at greater risk of falling, are going to feel safe using the transportation system. And then finally, reconsider transportation system pricing. So we're looking at a potential loss of revenue for state and localities from fuel taxes, parking, traffic tickets, because autonomous vehicles are going to probably be following the laws. And that's going to be a burden that cities need to address. ENO Foundation, others have proposed an autonomous vehicle mileage fee, or say a city cordon, to, like London does, for pricing. This can be passed, these types of state laws can be passed today. Tennessee is the first state that I'm aware of that has passed one of these type of AV mileage fees. And it's a good time to put it in place as the transition starts to happen. Also, these types of arrangements can ensure that the revenue collected can be spent on any form of transportation. Around 26 or 27 of our states today do not allow their existing gas tax revenue to be spent on public transportation. As we move toward this new vision, we have to be thinking not about transportation silos, but really what is the best investment for a particular local context, and making sure that the money is freed up in order to spend it on the type of investments that are most needed. Also, pricing can be applied as an incentive. For instance, reduced pricing for AVs operating with 2 or more passengers in the car. Varying pricing could create scenarios in when they not only discourage empty autonomous vehicles, but incentivize shared vehicles while reducing total vehicle miles of travel. Now I want to just flip back to this slide to talk very quickly about design and the concept of universal design. These are 2 autonomous vehicle designs that are commonly promoted, and honestly neither one of these vehicles will be very easy for an older adult, frail older adult, to get in and out of. And that's not to say that, you know, this technology can be applied to any vehicle body. It's just a matter that we have that wherewithal, that we're thinking about how this system needs to work for our future transportation users, many of whom are going to be over the age of 65 with special needs. And that is not limited to automobile design, but also as we think about new bus designs, how are those designs going to look? And this is a prototype from Mercedes-Benz, and I saw this and I just scratched my head and thought, how is an older adult with limited mobility and strength going to get themselves out of these papasan chairs on these buses? And what if the transit agency, in trying to cut some costs, removes the foam from the seats, and then they're slippery? They even will have more difficulty getting out of the seat. And what, just one pole for all people to try to hang on to? It's kind of a sexy looking design, but it's not a design that's going to work. And we just have to be very cognizant about universal design. Now, that wraps it up. That's kind of my soapbox for this afternoon. This is an area of work and movement that is rapidly changing. My own views on this continue to evolve. I'm currently working on a paper on this topic, so I would love any feedback from the planning community on that, and sort of let me know what challenges you're facing, what you're thinking about as well. I do think that the things that we really need to keep at center and important is that as these discussions and decisions on new technology take place, that planners' voices come to the table to make sure that some of our fundamental principles are met. And that is that we need to make sure that we are defending this concept of livable communities. You know, even for AARP, while we want to vastly expand mobility options for those 1 in 5 older adults who do not drive, we don't want to do that at the expense of our livable communities agenda. We need these vibrant communities where people can get around on foot, on bikes safely, etc. Also, equity considerations. We have to make sure that we fix some of the ills of our current and past transportation system. It's not acceptable that a third of our nation is isolated because they do not drive. And this is probably the only opportunity that we as a planning community has in our careers to really influence this in a major way. So with that, thank you. And these are resources that AARP offers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
Okay. Give me just a moment. I see the show my screen. Is that showing to folks?
Yep.
All right. So I get an opportunity to talk about my experiences, but also frame a little bit about housing policy for an aging population. I have to admit I'm a bit of an odd duck. I am a researcher at an institute at a university. I also have served for about 7 years now on the Portland Commission on Disabilities, which is a watchdog organization that's within government, and have been for 10 years now working on Portland's age-friendly cities projects since I was a graduate student back in 2006. And in addition to that, I've been a grant recipient from our local municipality, from the city of Portland, and I've been doing both evaluation as well as participation efforts with the city. So I've had a lot of different touch points on housing and aging, housing and accessibility. So I just wanted to start with a very brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. I want to give some context to housing accessibility at the national level. And then I'm going to drill in and talk a little bit about the work we're doing with age-friendly communities and some policies and projects in the city of Portland, including some of the work around accessible or accessory dwelling units, long-range planning efforts, and then some new projects that are on the books currently. Right. So I want to start with just showing the policy for planners, talking points for planners with respect to housing, and highlight a few things. So really what we're trying to do here is to provide a range of affordable and accessible housing options to promote housing development of differing sizes and costs, and to better use existing housing resources and advance aspects like universal design and visitability to promote accessibility in new housing. And I've got 2 images here at the bottom that are fairly interesting. This is from a 2000 publication from HUD, but one of them shows a stacked flat, so we see an accessible unit that's on the ground floor with one that's less accessible that would be on the 2nd floor, and then a 2-story semi-detached unit with a lift. And interestingly enough, we are looking at residential lifts in comparison to commercial lifts, which are very expensive both in the cost for installation, the cost of the infrastructure, and the cost for maintenance. Residential lifts that can come in at a price point that might work for a 4-unit type of residential dwelling. So to give a little bit of context with respect to planning for an aging population, we know that we're aging in a rapid and unprecedented manner. It's also important to note that our housing policies at the federal level, like the Americans with Disabilities and Architectural Barriers Act, really apply to specific developments, commercial grade developments, and don't address single-family homes, which leaves the onus on local policy, local land use, to really shape that through building codes and zoning codes. There is a lot of Peter Pan housing in the United States, and I'm taking this term from John Pinus, a professor at the University of Southern California. Really, Peter Pan housing doesn't consider people's needs across the life course, but really at one point in time. Unfortunately, this is ubiquitous throughout U.S. cities and communities. The ideas around universal design and the principles around visitability and other accessibility approaches promote quality of life and well-being for people of all ages and abilities. And I think that this gets to what Mildred was talking about earlier in her presentation. Also, it's important to highlight the lack of affordable housing that is really a crisis in communities throughout the United States and the world. But this is having an impact both on the social and economic stability of our communities. So things like gentrification and displacement really change individuals' interaction with their communities and their ability to stay independent and or interdependent within those communities. And we're seeing now changes to funding with respect to policies and programs. Section 8, Section 202, Section 811 are all in danger of cuts. And low-income housing tax credits, while they're an important part of affordable housing development, really aren't sufficient to meet the needs of our affordable housing needs and low-income older adults and people with disabilities. I'm only going to very briefly talk about this slide, the concept really around basic home design versus visitability, getting all the way to the end of a continuum of accessibility in universal design. I want to say that we in Portland, but in a lot of initiatives around the United States, I know that there are 60+ initiatives around visitability that have been started. They're really looking at 3 basic features, which would be a zero-step entrance, wide halls and doors, and at least a bath on the ground level that would allow somebody to come visit you. It wouldn't mean that they would have to live there. You know, we get up and move toward enhanced visitability, which might include things like lever door handles and better placement of outlets. And then this adaptability and flexible housing. So how do we have housing that meets the needs as our family structure changes, as our individual competence and individual physical ability and mobility changes? So I just wanted to point out that there's an important continuum. Different municipalities use different language. They prefer things. We find language around universal design in some of our code here in Portland, which is sometimes hard to implement because it's a concept rather than a set of design criteria or guidelines. So I wanted to dig into what we've been doing in Portland because there are some lessons that can be shared. I think that there's some opportunities for actually taking up some of these initiatives and incorporating them into your local efforts. So I want to talk about accessory dwelling units, about a couple of long-range planning efforts, including the Portland Plan, which was a visioning exercise, and our comprehensive plan, which is just about to get finalized. And then 2 projects called Residential Infill and Better Housing by Design, which really focus on single-dwelling units and multi-dwelling zones. And then I'm also going to just talk a little bit about the Age-Friendly Portland Multnomah County initiatives. They are about 10 years old now, and actually some of the oldest initiatives in the world with respect to age-friendly. So I'm going to start with accessory dwelling units. This is a hot-button issue. I've been in collaboration with colleagues in places like Philadelphia, Bloomington, Indiana, where they're finding pushback against incorporating ADU code into their zoning codes. A lot of that has to do with university settings and or people not wanting increased density, that kind of NIMBY approach. So here in Portland, we've got a system development charge waiver policy, which is saving people who are looking to build an ADU in their backyard between $8,000 and $13,000. This is a waiver of these system development charges that would be imposed by different bureaus like transportation, parks, water. It's up for renewal in 2018, just in about actually a year from now. And one of the things that we're looking at is to say, what can we do to allow for this policy to continue, but to make sure that when we're extending that we're getting something back in return, because we see a lot of ADUs. It's proliferating our single-family neighborhoods. And what we're hoping for is that there may be an opportunity to tie full waiver or 100% of the waiver to aspects like accessibility and affordability. So we're working right now with local electeds to kind of see what type of policy changes we might be able to put in as that policy comes up for renewal. It's important to note as well that Portland is charging short-term rental companies a lodging tax, which would include Airbnb and other things that are basically, it's a hotel tax that's being implemented on these short-term rentals, which is really important because we've seen that housing affordability has actually been affected by a glut of short-term rentals that are on the market. So ADUs going to visitors rather than people who are looking for affordable housing in their communities. In addition to that, Portland State University's Institute on Aging or Institute on Sustainable Solutions has started a small backyard home initiative that's really looking to reduce construction costs, increase financing options, and streamlining the process for design, finance, permitting. They're looking to get 100 ADUs online in a way that would be affordable, perhaps at a price point somewhere around $60,000 to $100,000. I'm not sure exactly where they've landed recently, whereas the average cost, I think that they had said it was about $170,000 for an ADU currently. In addition to that, Multnomah County, which is the county that Portland sits within, has a pilot project called A Place for You, which is pretty interesting and innovative. So they're going to, as a pilot project, design and install 4 ADUs that will be in private backyards. Homeless families will be able to live there for 5 years for free, after which time the homeowners, which are allowing that unit to be built, have ownership and unrestricted use of that particular ADU. Family tenants will be referred through a joint government program called Home for Everyone. So over the last 5 years, Portland has been working at a series of engagement efforts as well as policy development. The Portland Plan was the first piece that was started. So this was a visioning. It was an exercise that was really 2 years in the making. It included 20,000 public comments, and it was looking at 3 major areas within an equity framework: healthy, connected cities, or building around kind of neighborhood hubs and centers; economic prosperity and affordability, which would include housing, but also economic development and job opportunities; and thriving, educated youth. The interesting thing was we spent about a year and a half asking the city and recommending the city, doing kind of line-by-line review of documents and drafts to insert information in there about aging, disability, accessibility. And when we got to the final draft document, there wasn't anything in there. So we pulled off a major kind of public awareness effort, and we finally were able to get an insert into this Portland Plan, this visioning document that really looked at Portland as a place for all generations. I want to just quickly highlight a few of the things that were in that policy document. One of them was bolstering a framework for equity, working with the new Office of Equity and Human Rights that was developed. There was a call for the development of an age-friendly action plan, which we executed the next year. There was a prioritization and expansion of accessible housing, concentrating on age-friendly, accessible community hubs, fostering safe and accessible civic corridors, so the places where our high-frequent transit use was, so either frequent service buses and or streetcars and or light rail, or the one heavy rail line that we have in our metro area. We're interested in increasing access to and within medical institutions and increasing intergenerational mentoring opportunities, which included looking at things like how could schools be repurposed to have additional uses besides just education after hours. I'm going to just very briefly touch on the Age-Friendly Portland Action Area on housing. We wanted to highlight education for consumers, planners, and developers, improving accessibility. Most of that came through improving policy and code. The next piece was to encourage innovative approaches, and a lot of that has to do with the types of projects like the ADU projects I'd mentioned earlier, as well as advancing opportunities for aging in communities. So it was partnering with organizations, not only Age-Friendly Portland, but the Village movement, and thinking once again about how policies might be able to shape opportunities for aging, and thinking of housing continuums that would exist in any particular community. The comprehensive plan came next. It was a long-range plan that really helped the city prepare for and manage our growth. It's very common in municipalities across the United States. And I want to jump into a little bit here. I'm not going to drill too deeply here, but in the housing chapter, there was really a focus on equitable access to housing and really looking at people of all ages and abilities, which is where a lot of that age-friendly starts to come in. And I'm not going to read through this next slide, but just highlight the fact that some of the policies that dealt with adaptable housing, physical accessible housing, accessible design for all, aging in place, and responding to social isolation. And I think that this is all really important stuff that we're now looking at implementing and moving to that next stage of policy development. So in those efforts, there are a couple of projects that I just very briefly want to touch on. And you can see here, this is for those of you who may be familiar with Opticos Design's missing middle or middle housing structure. The residential infill project that I'll talk about really deals with the single family or single dwelling zones, better housing by design, that multi-dwelling. And I'm not going to talk about the mixed-use zones project, but there is some important aspects around aging and inclusion there as well. So with respect to the residential infill project, we're anticipating in the next 20 or so years about 123,000 households. I can tell you based on research that we've done that about 60% of those will have a head of household age 60 or older, somebody age 60 or older who's living in that household. And so about 20% of this household or growth is going to happen in our single dwelling residential zones, but it's built out to a large extent in the city. So we're looking at ways that residential infill could really address some of these issues. Also really curbing the size of McMansions that were being built, looking at affordability and housing choices and new alternatives that might be important. Just a very brief view, you can see that the darker shaded area in the larger kind of view is the whole of the city of Portland. And so this housing opportunity overlay study boundary really drilled into a large majority of the city and looked at a lot of those higher density residential areas in the R2.5, R5, and R7, which are minimum lot size designations, so 2.5 equaling a minimum lot size of 2,500 square feet. A couple of highlights that I wanted to show you. The first is here with respect to housing choice and allowing for more housing types. We have effectively, as a city, proposed that we would allow where a house previously was allowed to have one accessory dwelling unit, we would allow a house to have two accessory dwelling units in that housing opportunity overlay, which would include an external and an internal ADU. Or where a single family family home used to be available, it could be a duplex. Or the duplex could also have an ADU where a duplex was once offered, or a duplex could be a triplex in another way. And I do want to highlight here, I just came back, that there really is an exploration here of how bonus units could be age-friendly and affordable and deal with tree preservation. I'm just quickly going to talk about cottage clusters. This is another option that I think has a lot of possibility with respect to the aging of our population. I really appreciate we were able to do this in a couple of our zones, just the R1 and R2 zones now, but we're trying to expand that to include other properties that would be at least 10,000 square feet. And as an advocate and a policy kind of watchdog, I came to City Council and I provided them with a menu of options for thinking about what visitable and accessible development options were in front of us. So I think that the real piece here is that we had suggested looking at a regulatory approach. There's been a lot of pushback from the Homeowners Association, the Home Builders Association, and others actually, including the nonprofit. But the idea that regulating and requiring aspects of visitability, especially visitability, which would include that zero-step entrance, would actually have the strongest impact. And there are municipalities in the United States that are doing this. If we work from an incentive-based approach, we would have less of an impact, but there would be opportunities as well through density bonuses, fee waivers, tax credits, and/or system development charge waivers like I talked about earlier that really could move forward the type of visitable and/or adaptable and accessible housing in our region. The voluntary option, which would really look at declarations and education, would have the most minimal impact. This is the easiest pathway because it doesn't require the same type of policy, legislation, and/or incentives. And there are some communities that are doing this work, and it's been effective, but it's not the way that we would achieve meeting the needs of our aging population. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is a Better Housing by Design project, which is currently in an early stage of development. We're still in concept development. Equity is a very important piece here, but we started looking at a couple of really interesting issues. So the project purpose and scope was to revise zoning code and design standards and to really look at the multi-dwelling zones outside of the central city and to develop new approaches to creating street and pedestrian connections. There's been incredible work here. A lot of what we've focused on is kind of how internal and external social spaces could be developed, how when outdoor clustered kind of housing might be available and green space might be an outcome of that type of development, that there'd be accessible routes and paths that would allow people of all ages and abilities to kind of work there. Housing diversity is critically important here. I'd say that one of the big pushes that we've had with respect to this project to go from kind of that townhome side-by-side development to thinking a little bit more of a form-based code approach, as well as adding additional units and thinking about things like stacked units as well. So I know at the moment that we are running very short on time. So I'm going to turn this back over. I appreciate your time, and we'll leave it up to questions at this juncture.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We'll just take like 2 questions, and then we can close up for the day. And the first question, it's going to be for any of the panelists. I'm pulling it up right now. I'm getting a slow message. Okay. Do you support zoning code changes that allow small-scale group homes for 10 to 12 seniors as a by right use in most residential and mixed-use zoning districts?
I just want to say that this is a conversation that we started to have here in Portland, and I think that I would say yes. I think that really the big thing for me is to look for opportunities for a continuum of care that would allow people to leave their homes, traditional homes or apartments, and move into different options that would meet their needs as their functional ability changes. The big issue is that if there's a long-term care component, there needs to be a licensure and a quality of care assurance.
Any of the other speakers? Okay, next question. This one is for Mildred. I've often mentioned the possibility of using school buses for public transit, and people always look at me like I'm crazy. So I'm happy to hear that that's mentioned. Can you talk about some communities that are doing this?
Well, of course, New York City is the best known for it, which I think is kind of interesting because New York City probably has some of the best public transit of any city around, but there's still neighborhoods that are underserved, and their program is particularly designed for getting seniors to the grocery store. And they use the school buses in between the times when the school bus is doing pickup and drop off for the younger kids. In some communities, we don't actually have school buses running full in some of the rural communities, and we often are seeing increasing behavior problems on school buses. So the notion of actually picking up children and seniors at the same time and thinking of extra classrooms in your school building serving as a senior center, and even your lunchroom offering a third lunch period that could be your congregate meal site. So the notion that you might actually integrate seniors and children on the bus at the same time with services for both age groups in the school is another possibility. We need to drill down on this survey and see all of the communities that are doing this. I know in New York State about 20 years ago a law got passed that said it was okay and legal to allow allow people who aren't school children to ride on the bus, but many communities aren't aware of that, and there's this increasing fear of mixing people. It's interesting to me how in public transit we know that we mix people and it seems to be okay, but when it comes to schools we tend to think that everything needs to be separate, and I think we need to revisit those assumptions.
Okay, great. We'll do one last question here. It seems like budgets are consistently being reduced, especially in county public transportation agencies. Is it possible that our thinking of what is public transportation might just be going to be privatized at some point?
Well, I think this is Jana, and I think that is an excellent question. I think that there's quite a lot of opportunity and we're seeing some private sector companies come online and providing transportation services that we might have otherwise, looked at to be fully relied upon by the public sector. I also think that, all of these companies, the transportation network companies, Uber, Lyft, Liberty, others, to my knowledge, I don't think any of them have turned a profit. The first 2 I know have large investments, investor financing that have really made them possible. So time will tell to see if they can really be competitive, particularly for providing service to populations that are more vulnerable and more transit dependent, especially lower income populations that may not have the resources to pay very high fares out of pocket.
Okay. Anyone else have any other comments on that question? All right. Well, it's just a minute past 2:30, so we're going to have to go ahead and close up. Sorry, there were a few more questions in there, but if you do have a burning question, just feel free to contact one of the presenters. Again, their contact information is on the slide in front of you. And as a reminder, this webcast is being recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast, and we will have a PDF available for download on our webcast webpage, which is ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So Mildred, Jana, and Alan, and Ramona, if you're still hanging on the line from the private practice division, thanks to all of you for joining us today and taking out some time on Friday to talk to us about this important topic. And we will talk to everyone next time. Thanks, everybody.